While John had been away on business in Natchez, the mistress of the plantation stayed busy in her never-ending responsibilities of keeping the plantation running smoothly. It was early spring, and the factory was busy making cotton clothing for the field hands to wear during the hot summer. Every able-bodied female whose fingers were nimble enough to push a needle and thread through the coarsely woven fabric was put to work sewing clothing. Monique was in charge of cutting out the fabric from the patterns she kept neatly stored in the sewing house, then showing the workers just how they were to be stitched together. 2 days after John's trip upriver, Angelique made her inspection of the factory to see how production was going when she saw Monique walking about the plantation from the loom house to the sewing house with her long, wavy hair flowing down instead of being tied up in a bandana, as was the rule of the plantation. Her venom for Monique was strong. How arrogant, she thought Monique, to show off in front of the whole plantation and parade about like she was the mistress. She ordered that Monique be taken to the whipping post and stripped. All the whole plantation was summoned to witness the punishment. Then, taking the shears that Monique had used to cut the cloth, the mistress cut Monique's hair and cut it to the scalp, cutting her with savage roughness. Satisfied she had done her Christian duty to battle sin, she then had her flogged. When John returned, he found the whole plantation strangely quiet. None of the usual beehive of activity except for the normal work duties, no laughing or singing. Even the slave children were absent when he arrived. Walking into the plantation sewing house, he found Monique in her little sewing room, working her fingers without even looking up at him. He came behind her and put his arms around her to embrace her. She pulled away, and her scarf came off her head, exposing her shame. "What in the name of God happened to you?" John asked. "I sinned and had to be punished," said Monique, without even looking up from her sewing, with tears filling her eyes. Again he tried to embrace her, and again she pulled away, saying, "I don't worry for myself, but she done took Sylvester into the big house, and I fear what she might do to him. I will lay down the law to her not to ever touch him. But you, my love, must get away from here before she has a chance to do this or something worse to you." That night when John went into the big house, he took his wife by the arm and led her to the study, where he drew the door closed with a loud crash. He swung around and slapped her across the face with enough force to send her crashing to the floor, her ring of keys clanging like a dinner bell. "How dare you strike me like a common field hand?" she said, staring up at him with contempt. Pulling herself up from the floor, she straightened herself, then faced her husband's anger. "So you've heard about the little party we had while you were gone? That wench has to learn her place. I'm the mistress of this here plantation, and my children are the heirs, and not her little white nigger bastard." John came toward her with his hand outstretched to strike her again, then stopped, and looked down at her, then coldly, with a tone she had never heard before, and sent chills down her back. John said, "I promise you that if you ever lay another hand on Monique, or even think of hurting Sylvester, I will kill you. And that I promise you." On that note, John turned on his heels, and out of the house he went, slamming the door behind him. John spent as much time as he could with Monique, in their little cabin, making love and planning their departure from Riverview. Sylvester was 5 years old when he was moved into the big house and his mother was taken away from the plantation. Sylvester was dressed in his brother's hand-me-downs that were too small for him. Then he was instructed he was to be the playmate for all of the children. Being only 5, he wasn't able for much responsibility, but he learned quickly and soon was responsible for keeping their playroom in order and the children's clothing kept tidy. But mostly he had fun playing games with the children. He missed his mother terribly at first and cried himself to sleep many nights. He slept on a tumble bed that slid out from under his brother's bed, but on many nights Starla would take him in her bed to comfort him when he was crying. "You don't need to cry, Sylvester. Star, I love you." She would wrap her arms around him as he buried his head in her long blonde hair, crying himself to sleep. Starla and Sylvester became so close during their early childhood, they forgot they were young mistress and slave. The girls enjoyed dressing Sylvester up in their old clothes, much like dressing a life-size doll, and Sylvester loved these times so much he wanted to dress that way all the time. It was amazing how much Sylvester looked like Starla when he was dressed up in her clothing. The same delicate features, even the same color of hair and eyes. The only difference was that Sylvester was slightly taller, but not enough to notice unless they were standing side by side. The children loved to play tricks on people when they came to visit the plantation by pretending that Sylvester was Starla, dressing him up and sending him in her place. Sylvester loved this charade, but of course it was embarrassing when Starla popped up from behind a chair or a bush to say they were all tricked by Sylvester, the Negro playboy. One day it was arranged for a photographer to come and take photographs of the children, and the children decided to play their little game on everybody again. It wasn't until they had finished taking the photographs that Starla ran in full of laughs at how they had all been tricked. This time their mother had had all she could stand, so she punished all the children. She then turned to Sylvester and slapped him across the face. "Do you want me to cut all that pretty hair from your head like I did that whore of a mother of yours?" she shouted. Sylvester was never to wear anything again but boys' clothing, or he would be severely punished. Sylvester burst into tears as his father came in to comfort him. Then turning to his wife, he said, "What did I tell you long ago? If I hear or see you ever touching Sylvester again, I will do for you what I promised then." She stood her ground with her arms folded, then marching up to her, he pulled her by the hair, then up the stairs into their room where he slammed the door behind them. Shouts and screams came from the room, then all was silent. Coming back down the stairs, John found Sylvester cowering behind a chair. Taking him in his arms, he held him close and said, "She won't ever touch you again. You can wear whatever you want of the children's old clothes. Just don't try to pretend to be Starla. It's just not right to trick people." Sylvester was moved to La Petite Mansion to live with his grandmother. Sylvester became more secure living with grandmother and not having to take the verbal and physical abuse from Angelique.